So our next guest is also an alum of the Israel Arts and Science Academy. And while her startup is just starting up, her vision for the future is out of this world. Please welcome the founder of BubbleBase, Helen Wexler. Hi, Helen. Hi, welcome back. We've had an exciting morning meeting the NASA folks.
Yeah.
So you are working on a project to build houses on Mars. Okay, so how did you come up with that kind of idea?
I get that question a lot, but I just want to start before we get into it, thanking my friends from the Israel Arts and Science Academy for having me here today, and especially to Bob Asher. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. So I got into 3D printing Mars habitats when I was an architecture student in Israel, and my final thesis was about the colonization of Mars. I was really interested in urbanization in tabula rasa, and as I was working on this project, I just stumbled upon a call for proposals from NASA to 3D print Mars habitats. And so I joined forces with a friend who was working on 3D printing, and we submitted a proposal. Little did I know, all the other teams submitted very technical proposals, while
sense.
our team submitted a comic book.
Okay, the creative approach.
Yeah, so
This is your proposal?
yeah, that's the piece of the comic book. Fortunately, it was very well received, and we kept progressing from phase to phase in the competition, ultimately winning an honorable mention in the first phase.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you mentioned 3D printing, and for those of us that are not experts in this, can you just give us a brief explanation of what 3D printing is?
Yeah, so it's an alternative form of manufacturing. So how it works is you would have a digital file of the object, and then you send that file to the printer. And the printer then essentially takes that object and breaks it down into layers, and then deposits the material layer by layer until you get the entire object. And that's kind of different from other manufacturing things like injection molding, which would be more traditional type of manufacturing.
And while this is very interesting, can you just tell us why would we actually want to build houses on Mars?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think houses probably wouldn't be our first product.
Okay.
And we would more likely be supporting robotic missions to Mars with critical infrastructure like landing pads, launch pads, radiation shields, structural trusses. But also as far as kind of the grand scale of things, I'm looking at this a little bit like Plan B for humanity.
Okay.
Yeah, if in the small chance that Earth becomes uninhabitable, I think it would be very good if we were a multi-planetary species, so we don't end up like the dinosaurs, essentially.
Okay, so we hope we don't need that Plan B, but it's there just in case.
Exactly.
Okay. And why would we want to 3D print the houses on, or the infrastructure on Mars, as opposed to just building normally like we would here on Earth?
Yeah, it's very expensive to send things to space, and you need a lot of material to build a house. So you don't want to send all of your construction materials to Mars. The idea is that you send the 3D printer, and then the 3D printer uses the local Mars materials as the ink for the 3D printing, for the 3D printer. So that's the construction material.
So it uses its own resources to build those homes.
Exactly.
And what would the house look like that you would be building? Is it the same house that we think of that we're living in today?
It's a little bit different.
Okay. And I think we have a model that Hillary's going to bring out so we can see it. And I think we also have a picture. Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
this is basically, the model is split in half, so that's the inside and then the outside. And
yeah, so the idea is to have almost like a dome-like structure, and the geometry of that is so that it can self-support while it's being built, and you wouldn't need external scaffolding. And our concept is to have multiple 3D printers printing bricks, almost like Lego bricks, and then have a mobile robotic arm which goes and grabs the bricks and assembles them until it creates the whole structure, and that gives you a little more redundancy in the system.
Okay, so you enter this competition, but how do you know where to even start to build these homes?
Yeah, so the next part of the competition was harder because it was we needed to actually physically print things and send them to NASA. And we had no budget, no lab, but a lot of chutzpah. And so we actually borrowed some spare parts from the Bloomfield Science machine, and one of those parts was a pasta machine.
A pasta machine?
Yeah, like
from a
from
kitchen?
the kitchen, yeah.
Okay.
So we borrowed a pasta machine, and that was actually like the tank
And
for
this
the
is the
material.
pasta machine that we see?
Yes, that's a pasta machine and a hot air blower that's like taped on with duct tape.
Okay, very
and-
sophisticated.
Yeah, but this was kind of how we printed our first prototype. Fortunately, the material performed very well in structural analysis. So here we attached the pasta machine to a robotic arm in the showroom of the robotic arm importer in Israel. So we basically turned his showroom into a lab and printed our first prototype.
And then you needed something else.
Yeah, so after that, we had to print bigger stuff, and the pasta machine just wasn't going to cut it because it wasn't big enough. And so we wanted to get these clay-based extruders.
And what's an extruder?
So an extruder, it's basically a tank that kind of holds the material and then presses it out in a controlled way, and that would have allowed us to get a more accurate print than what we did with the pasta machine.
Okay, so you need these extruders, and how do you get the extruders?
So we got a small donation, which enabled us to buy it, but by the time we got the money, we were really close to the deadline. So we called up this company in Italy, and we said, how fast can you get us these extruders?
And why didn't you just get the extruders in Israel?
Nobody makes them in Israel.
Okay.
And so we negotiated them down from 2 weeks of manufacturing to 2 days, but then we said, how can we get it really fast? It was Shabbat, and FedEx doesn't work in Israel on Shabbat, so we said, we have a lot of pilot friends who work at El Al.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe one of our pilot friends happens to be going to Italy and can bring our extruders. So we actually found a friend who was flying an El Al plane from Milan to Israel the next day. And so he said, okay, well, we just have to get these extruders from the factory to the airport, and he's willing to bring them for us. So we found this Israeli girl who was a student in Italy, and we convinced her to go to the factory.
And you found her?
We found her on Facebook.
Go figure.
And we convinced her to go to this factory and pick up our box of extruders and bring it.
And they're not small, right?
No, it's like 100 pounds. Yeah. And so then I get a call a little bit later. She said, Helen, I'm really sorry. I have bad news. It hasn't gone through the Italian customs. They're not going to let you out. So at this point, I get introduced to some executives at El Al, and we now have a WhatsApp chat group called Flying to Mars, Smiley, Smiley. And I'm like, hi, guys, we're not going to get to the plane in time today. Can we get on the next flight? And they said, well, if you don't personally know the pilot, you're going to have to fly someone with it because it's a security issue. So we call back this girl from Facebook, and we're like, hey, do you want to come visit your family in Israel tomorrow with 100 kilos?
She had gone home.
Yeah, with 100 kilos of industrial extruders. And fortunately, she did. So she came to Israel with our extruders, and we integrated them with the printer in Israel.
It's an unbelievable story that I feel like would only happen with Israelis. So what did you guys do next?
We had a lot of other challenges to overcome in being able to produce our sample, and we made a lot of progress, but the results were still a little bit underwhelming. Fortunately, we made enough progress to get adopted by Caltech. So we started working on the project at Caltech, and we expanded our team and built our biggest printer yet. It's about the size of a Jeep.
That's what we're looking at now?
Yeah, so that's our third prototype.
And where do things stand now with the project?
So unfortunately, my dad became very ill, and I took some time off to spend with him. And that, coupled with budgetary issues in the project, caused us to actually leave the NASA competition. But my dad raised me to be very tenacious, and I really wanted to keep working on this and to figure out kind of how I can keep working on this project. And so I had this idea, well, maybe I could become a PhD student at Caltech, and then I would be able to keep working on this project. It was a tough sell because I went to art school before.
You're not the typical student.
And studied architecture, so that was a tough sell. So I spent the past semester doing graduate level engineering courses at Caltech to prove that I could do graduate level engineering classes at Caltech. And fortunately, it went well, and so they admitted me to the PhD program where I'll start
Just recently, she was admitted to Caltech in the PhD program. It was incredible. So aside from building homes or infrastructure on Mars, are there other uses for the technology that you're thinking about here on Earth?
Yeah, so I'm really excited for the implications of this for disaster relief and construction in remote areas. Again, because Mars is a very harsh atmosphere, so if stuff works, if you can get it to work on Mars, then you can get it to work in extreme environments here on Earth. For instance, if there's a flood and the roads are washed out, you could 3D print infrastructure and roads and allow emergency vehicles to access faster to get in medical care and supplies. So that's one application we're thinking about.
Well, this story is incredible, and whether it's on Mars or here on Earth or wherever you are going to be, we know where you are going to be incredibly successful, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you
Ladies
so much.
and gentlemen, Helen Wexler. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you.